When the divorce papers arrived, my world didn't just crumble, it imploded. 10 years of marriage, I shared all my life we built together, all reduced to a cold, formal document. She called me predictable, boring, a man who had settled into a comfortable but uninspiring routine. She said she wanted more, a life filled with excitement and passion, things she claimed I could no longer offer. She expected a fight, a messy, dramatic battle. She wanted tears, anger, begging. I gave her none of it. Instead, I gave her silence, a quiet dignity that seemed to unsettle her more than any outburst ever could. I packed my bags without a word of protest, signed the papers, and walked away from the life I knew. I didn't argue over assets. I let her have the house, the car, the life we had curated. All I took with me were my clothes, my books, and a profound sense of emptiness. She saw my silence as weakness, my compliance as surrender. She thought she had won, that she had broken me. She was wrong. The first few months were a blur of silent rooms and long, lonely nights. The silence I had used as a shield against her was now my constant companion, and it was deafening. But in that crushing quiet, something began to stir. I started running, first just around the block, then miles along the river. The physical exhaustion was a welcome distraction from the mental anguish. It was a pain I could control, a finish line I could cross. Then I picked up a guitar I hadn't touched since college. My fingers were clumsy at first, but slowly the chords came back. I started writing songs, pouring all the pain, the betrayal, and the quiet resilience into melodies. It wasn't for an audience. It was for me. It was a way to speak when I had no words. I reconnected with old friends I had drifted away from. We went hiking, tried new restaurants, and had long conversations about everything and nothing. They didn't see a broken man. They saw the friend they had missed, the guy with a quick laugh and a passion for life that had been dormant for too long. I started a small consulting business, channeling my predictable and methodical nature into building something of my own. It was a risk, but it was mine. It flourished. About 2 years later, I ran into her at a cafe. She looked the same, a bit strained. Perhaps the exciting life she had chased hadn't quite materialized the way she'd planned. She saw me, and her eyes widened in disbelief. I wasn't the broken man she had left. I was fit, confident, and genuinely happy. She tried to make small talk, asking what I'd been up to. Just smiled. I told her I was doing well, that I was happy. I didn't mention my new business, the marathon I had run, or the small gigs I was playing with my band. I didn't need to. My success wasn't a performance for her benefit. It wasn't about revenge. It was about rediscovery. I had let her definition of me become my reality. In leaving, she had inadvertently given me the greatest gift, the chance to redefine myself. My quiet dignity during the divorce wasn't weakness. It was the foundation upon which I rebuilt my life, stronger and more authentic than ever before. She hadn't broken me. She had set me free. And that was a truth that needed no words. Thanks for watching. Once the papers were signed and the silence settled, a new story began forming around him. One he never agreed to, but was forced to carry. People assumed they knew how this would end. They had seen it before, or at least thought they had. A man left quietly was a man undone. A man who didn't fight was a man who lost. His restraint was translated into weakness by those who needed noise to recognize strength. She spoke carefully when others asked. Never cruel, never kind, just selective. She let them believe he couldn't handle the pressure, that the marriage had outgrown him. She didn't need to exaggerate. Assumptions did the work for her. Silence. It's easy to rewrite when the other person refuses to interrupt the narrative. Friends stopped calling him as often. Conversations became shorter, awkward, heavy with pity. Some looked at him like he was fragile glass, others like a cautionary tale. They expected visible damage. Weight loss, late nights at bars. Reckless decisions, something that confirmed the version of him they had already accepted. Even she waited for signs. A message sent too late at night. A question disguised as concern. A crack. Every day that passed without one only strengthened her belief that he was barely holding together, surviving on routine and denial. In her mind, men like him didn't rebuild. They endured until they collapsed. What no one saw was how deliberate his quiet was. He didn't disappear because he was ashamed. He withdrew because he understood how easily emotions become entertainment. He refused to perform pain for an audience that had already chosen sides. Each day he woke up early, moved with intention, and focused on what remained under his control. While they imagined him replaying old arguments, he was relearning discipline. While they assumed he was stuck in regret, he was restructuring his life piece by piece. There were nights when the weight hit him unexpectedly, when memories surfaced without warning, but even those moments were private. He didn't broadcast grief. He processed it. The absence confused people. Recovery without chaos didn't fit their expectations. Some mistook his consistency for nothing. Others assumed he was pretending. No one believed growth could happen without spectacle. They waited for the moment he would prove them right, for the stumble that would validate their judgment. She noticed it too. At first, the lack of reaction felt like victory. Then it began to feel unsettling. The man she thought would unravel simply continued. No public breakdown, no attempts to rewrite the past, no explanations. His life didn't look dramatic, but it also didn't look right. The more time passed, the more uncomfortable the silence became. She had expected distance to weaken him, to make him small. Instead, it made him unreachable. Information about him stopped circulating. Updates dried up. Curiosity replaced certainty, but pride prevented her from asking. People still spoke in past tense about him, as if his best years were already behind him. They assumed stagnation because they couldn't see movement. They assumed loss because they couldn't measure progress. The absence of proof became proof itself in their minds, and through it all, he allowed the misunderstanding to live. He didn't correct anyone. He didn't rush to reclaim an image that no longer served him. Being underestimated gave him room. Being forgotten gave him time. While others finalized the story of his defeat, he was still writing quietly, without witnesses, without permission. Away from familiar faces and shared spaces, he began again without announcing it to anyone. There was no dramatic reset, no moment where everything suddenly made sense. Just small, deliberate choices repeated daily. He stopped trying to explain himself to people who had already decided who he was. He stopped checking whether anyone noticed his absence. The rebuild didn't start with confidence. It started with structure. Mornings became quieter and earlier. He learned the discipline of showing up for himself when no one was watching. Progress wasn't measured in applause or validation, but in consistency. He focused on what he could control: his body, his work, his time, his reactions. The chaos that once lived in his mind slowly gave way to order. He didn't post updates or hint at transformation. There were no cryptic quotes, no before and after declarations. The work felt too personal to perform. He understood that real rebuilding is fragile in its early stages, easily damaged by outside opinions, so he protected it by keeping it invisible. Failures still happened. Some days felt heavy, like the past was dragging behind him, refusing to let go. Memories surfaced at inconvenient times. Old conversations replayed without permission. But instead of numbing himself or running from the discomfort, he sat with Italiano. He learned the difference between pain that weakens and pain that teaches. One demanded escape, the other demanded endurance. As weeks turned into months, something shifted. He wasn't chasing the person he used to be anymore. He was becoming someone unfamiliar, someone shaped by silence rather than reaction. His confidence grew quietly, rooted in proof only he could see. He no longer needed reassurance that he was moving forward. The progress spoke to him in subtler ways. Through stability, clarity, and calm, opportunities began appearing where excuses once lived. He took risks that scared him, not because he was fearless, but because fear no longer controlled his decisions. He invested in himself with a patience he had never been allowed before. There was no one questioning his priorities, no one minimizing his efforts. The solitude became a tool rather than a punishment. People from the past would occasionally cross his mind, but they felt distant, like characters from a story he no longer belonged to. He didn't resent them. Resentment required emotional access, and that door was closed. He understood that growth didn't require anger to fuel it. It required focus. What he was building couldn't be explained in a sentence. It wasn't just financial progress or physical change, though both were happening. It was internal alignment. He knew who he was becoming, and that knowledge brought a quiet certainty that no external validation could replace. The world he created for himself didn't look dramatic from the outside. It looked ordinary, even boring. But within it, he felt strong in a way he never had before. His decisions were no longer reactions to loss, but steps toward purpose. He wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. He was trying to live in a way that felt honest. There was power in knowing that the people who once doubted him had no access to the version of him that was emerging. They were still holding on to an image that no longer existed, while assumptions stayed frozen in time. He kept moving forward. The rebuild wasn't loud enough to attract attention, and that was exactly why it worked. No one could interfere with what they couldn't see. No one could sabotage what they didn't believe was happening. In the quiet away from expectations and judgment, he built a life that didn't need witnesses to be real. Have you ever run into someone from your past and been completely shocked by who they've become? I'm not just talking about a new haircut or a different fashion sense. I mean a fundamental change. Like they're a completely different person. That's exactly what happened to me last week, and it's had me thinking ever since. I was grabbing a coffee at this little cafe downtown. The kind of place with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls. As I was waiting for my order, I heard a voice say my name. I turned around, and for a second, I didn't recognize him. It was Leo. Leo, from college. The guy who was the life of every party. The one who never seemed to take anything seriously. But this wasn't the Leo the first remembered. The old Leo was all loud shirts, and even louder laughs. He was the guy who'd suggest ditching class for a spontaneous road trip, who lived on instant noodles and pure, chaotic energy. And he was fun, but he was also a miss. Always late, always forgetting things, always charming his way out of trouble. We were close for a while, part of the same friend group. But like a lot of college friendships, we just drifted apart after graduation. The man standing in front of me now was calm, grounded. He was wearing a simple, well-fitting sweater, and his smile wasn't the wild grin I remembered, but something softer, more genuine. We sat down at a small table, and he started telling me about his life. He's a landscape architect now. He designs gardens and parks. He talked about soil composition and native plant species, with this quiet passion that was completely captivating. I asked him, what happened to the guy who said his only life plan was to wing it? He laughed, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the old Leo. He told me that after college, the winging it strategy stopped working so well. He felt lost, drifting from one odd job to another, feeling more and more empty. He said he hit a point where he realized that the constant chaos he created was just a way to avoid figuring out what he actually wanted. So, he made a choice. He started small. He got a job at a local nursery just to have some structure, and that's where he discovered his love for plants. He said working with the earth, seeing things grow, it grounded him. It taught him patience. He went back to school, got his degree, and slowly built a life that was intentional, not accidental. He talked about his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and the small house they bought with a big yard. It's turning into a massive garden. He showed me pictures on his phone, and his eyes lit up in a way I'd never seen before. It wasn't the manic excitement of the old Leo. It was a deep-settled contentment. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. He was building something beautiful and lasting. As I walked home, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. It's so easy to label people, to put them in a box based on who they were when we knew them. We see them as the party animal, the slacker, the drama queen. But people aren't static. They can change, evolve, and completely rewrite their own stories. Leo's transformation wasn't some magical overnight event. It was a series of small, conscious decisions. It was the result of hitting a low point and deciding to climb, one step at a time. It is a powerful reminder that the person you are today doesn't have to be the person you are tomorrow. It's never too late to plant a new seed, to cultivate a different life. Seeing Leo, so happy and so at peace, was genuinely inspiring. It makes you wonder, who from your past would you not even recognize today? And more importantly, what changes are you capable of making in your own life? Thanks for listening to my story today. If this resonated with you, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. See you in the next one. He never explained himself after that day, and that was what stayed with her the most. There were no follow-up conversations, no attempts to reframe the past, no quiet confessions meant to soften the realization. He didn't need to clarify anything. His life spoke in a language that didn't require translation. She expected, at some point, to feel justified, to believe that her decision had been necessary, that whatever became of him afterward was incidental. But the more time passed, the harder that belief became to hold. His success didn't feel like an attack, yet it landed heavier than any confrontation could have. There was no anger in it, no bitterness aimed in her direction. It existed independently of her, and that independence was what made it hurt. What unsettled her was how unreachable he had become. Not physically, but emotionally. There was no opening to step into, no role left for her to play in his story. Even regret had no place to land. He wasn't waiting to be understood. He wasn't hoping she would notice. The distance was complete, intentional, and permanent. People around her mentioned him occasionally, not with pity anymore, but with curiosity. The tone had changed. Questions replaced assumptions. She noticed how carefully his name was spoken now, how neutral admiration had replaced quiet dismissal. No one connected the dots out loud, but she felt the comparison forming anyway. She realized then that revenge didn't always look like retaliation. Sometimes it looked like peace, like moving forward so cleanly that the past had no leverage left. He didn't need her to feel guilty. He didn't need her to miss him. He didn't need acknowledgement at all. For him, the greatest shift was internal. He no longer measured himself against what he lost. The marriage, the shared plans, the version of himself that tried to hold everything together. Those things no longer defined the edges of his life. He carried the lessons without carrying the weight. There were moments when the past crossed his mind, but they no longer demanded a response. The hurt had done its work and moved on. He understood now that silence could be a boundary, not a weakness. That walking away without explanation could be an act of self-respect rather than surrender. She wondered, quietly, if she had misjudged his stillness all along. If the calm she interpreted as emptiness had always been restraint. If the lack of resistance had never been about defeat, but about knowing when not to fight for something that no longer existed. What she felt wasn't jealousy in the traditional sense. It was the slow recognition that she had underestimated the cost of losing him. Not because of what he owned or how he lived now, but because of who he had become once he stopped trying to be understood by her. He didn't carry resentment toward her. That chapter had closed without ceremony. In its place was a life built on clarity, intention, and boundaries that didn't require explanation. He had learned that the most effective response to being underestimated was not correction, but distance. The revenge, if it could even be called that, was quiet and complete. It lived in his absence, in his progress, in the fact that he no longer needed to be seen by the person who once believed she could break him. He had taken the pain, the silence, and the assumptions, and turned them into something untouchable. And somewhere in that realization, without confrontation or apology, the truth settled in. She hadn't destroyed him. She had removed herself from the only version of him she would ever have access to. The man who emerged afterward belonged entirely to himself, shaped by loss, refined by silence, and unreachable by anyone who only understood him when he was trying to stay. This story doesn't end with revenge spoken out loud or pain thrown back where it came from. It ends with understanding, with the quiet realization that some losses are not punishments, they are exits. The heartbreak was real, but it was never meant to destroy. It was meant to strip away what no longer fit. In the silence, strength was rebuilt. In the absence, clarity was found. There was no need to prove anything, because the life that followed became the answer. Some people only know your value when they no longer have access to it, and by then, it's already too late. This is the kind of ending that doesn't need applause. It lingers instead. A reminder that the most powerful response to being underestimated is not noise, not revenge, but becoming unreachable to the version of yourself that once begged to be understood.